Welcome. During the time that this lesson lasts, we are going to stay in England all the time. And we are going to talk about what is called the English Reformation in England. However, it is really the history of the Tudor dynasty. And the Tudor dynasty started with Henry VII, and we're going to talk about him in this lesson, and then we are going to go to the end of the Tudor dynasty with Elizabeth I. So we are going to talk about every single monarch, every single king or queen of that dynasty, and at the end we'll just go and witness the change of dynasties, and then we're going to see how King James, the famous King James, the one famous for the Bible, he was from the house of Stuart, and because Elizabeth died without children, then the crown went to the dynasty of Mary Queen of Scots. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And something that you may know, and that is very interesting when you think of the big picture of the Reformation. The English people, both the people and the royalty, they did not care for all those philosophical or religious concepts. So the Reformation in England is not a religious movement. It did have, of course, religious implications and religious changes, but the core of the Reformation is purely political, and I would dare say it's purely personal. It is just a human event, and it happened because of the human feelings. That's really what the English Reformation is about. So the first king that we are going to talk about is, we're going to mention first the first of the Tudor dynasty. His name is Henry VII, and he took the crown after a long war. The war is called the War of the Roses, and he was very tired of fighting, but he was very afraid that his crown would not last and that his dynasty would not last. But also he had one problem, and he had no money. So he needed to find ways to make money. So one way was to marry his oldest son to a very rich woman. And that very rich woman happened to be the daughter of Queen Isabella of Castile. So he asked, this is Henry VII, he asked Queen Isabella for her daughter Catherine to marry his oldest son Arthur. So what we are seeing here is Arthur, the heir to the throne of England, and Catherine around the time that they got married. Catherine was about maybe, I would say 14 or so. And so they got married. The marriage was, they were two children, and the marriage was not consummated. And soon after they got married, he died. So Catherine ended up being a widow, a very young widow. And this is about the time, this is shortly after she married the youngest brother of Arthur's, Henry, the future Henry VIII. Because the problem that Henry VII had was the money from the dowry was gone. So he could not send Catherine back home without money. without the dowry. So the only possibility was to marry her to the second son, the spare son, we call it, because every royal family in Europe, even today, their main goal is to have an heir. Usually they like to have a boy, and then they are desperate to get a spare boy, a spare son. So if the first one dies, they always have the second one. And this is what happened in England. So Catherine then, here you see Catherine. This is Catherine shortly after she married Henry, and this is Catherine when Henry decided to annul the marriage and send her as a prisoner to a faraway castle. She was in her maybe 40s in this picture. So that's how the Reformation in England started, and this is what this lesson is about. Henry VIII then married his next wife, Anne Boleyn, and of course he's hoping to have a daughter with Anne Boleyn. When Anne Boleyn was pregnant when they got married, and when Anne Boleyn had a daughter, he was very angry. And when Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, was just a child, maybe 5 or 6, Henry decided that he didn't want to get married anymore to Anne Boleyn. He had fallen in love with somebody else, and that somebody else happened to be Jane Seymour, who was a very, very kind person. She had a baby boy, but unfortunately she died in childbirth. So then Henry married somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. But the good thing about the entire thing is that Henry was very happy because he has now an heir to the throne. And when Henry dies, this young child takes the throne, and he's only 9 when he takes the throne, and I believe he's like 14 when he dies. However, when we start looking at the religious aspect of all this, this is very interesting, because Henry VIII did not want to change anything as far as the religious life of England. However, since the Pope did not want to give him the annulment, he separated from the Church of England, and this is what officially is called the English Reformation. So the Church of England is no longer a part of the Catholic Church, and the Pope is not recognized as the head of the Church of England. The head of the Church of England is the king. So when Edward becomes king, then Edward is the head of the Church of England. And because Edward is so young, then his uncles and some other politicians are the ones who make the decision. And it is with Edward that the Church of England becomes what we could say more Protestant, following the ideas of Martin Luther, or some people even wanted to follow the ideas of Calvin. Edward then has a few policies toward making the Church of England more Protestant. However, he died soon, and when he dies, his older sister, Mary, takes the throne. Mary is already old, and she's very bitter because she had lost everything when her father divorced or annulled the marriage with her mother. She has lost her status, and she hated anything that had to do with that event. So what she wanted was to return England to Catholicism. And to do that, to achieve that, she decided to marry the son of, you may remember him, Charles V, Emperor Charles V. And Emperor Charles V, who was so Catholic and so religious, and he wanted to help Mary had his own son, Philip, marry Tudor. The marriage was a disaster. Philip didn't like Mary, and they didn't have children. She thought she was with child, but it was not. So they did not have children, and soon after she found out that the child that she thought was a child, it happened that it was a tumor, and soon after that she died. And then when she died, since she could not have children, then her sister Elizabeth came to the throne. And Elizabeth she's an amazing woman. She's one of those famous women in history. In fact, there are few women who have given names to an era, to a period, and we know that there is a period in England that is called the Elizabethan period because Elizabeth was an amazing person. I guess her childhood, how much she suffered, had made her be very manipulative, very careful, but those qualities or defects, the way you want to see it, made her be a very good monarch. So Elizabeth then made some arrangements, and you are going to study all that, to make the Church of England not totally Protestant and not Catholic, somehow in between. She tried to compromise to please most of her subjects. She couldn't, so there were many people who opposed her, obviously, but she managed to have a very good kingdom. So when you talk and when you study and read about Elizabeth, you are going to see that Elizabeth, in every aspect, social, political, even her foreign policy, she was always smart. She was always careful, manipulative, I would say hypocritical, but it worked for her. And she maintained peace, and when the only time that Philip II of Spain tried to invade England, it was a disaster. So we could say that if we go back to the Protestant Reformation, and if we go back to the English Reformation, we could say that with Elizabeth, England became a Protestant country, but the Protestantism in England was, I would say, very moderate. As far as religious issues, there was no difference between the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church. As far as organization, there was really no difference. So there were a few changes in the ritual, but even today, if you go to a service in the Church of England, you'll see that it's very similar if you then go to a Catholic service. In fact, the Church of England in the United States is called the Episcopalian Church. So what happened then with Elizabeth? Well, one thing that Elizabeth had to deal with, and this is something that many historians disagree, is Elizabeth was faced with a threat of the group of Catholics who felt that she was illegitimate, and they didn't want to have her as queen, and they wanted Mary, Queen of Scots, who was her cousin, Elizabeth's cousin, in the throne, and they involved Mary, Queen of Scots in some conspiracies, and Mary, Queen of Scots had to be executed, and Elizabeth ordered the execution. So this is one of those sad episodes in the life of Elizabeth. The other thing that happened was Elizabeth did not have children, and because she did not have children, and she knew that when she died, the throne would go precisely to the son of Mary Queen of Scots, whom she hated so much. But Elizabeth had chosen not to have children, so when she died, Mary Queen of Scots' son, who was King of Scotland, and he was from the house of Stuart because his father was a Stuart, then he's the one who became the King of England. So this is the end of the Tudor dynasty and the beginning of the Stuart dynasty. So many of the historians wonder why is it that Elizabeth chose not to get married and not to have children? Well, she always claimed that she was married to England, but she also knew that if she wanted to continue with her dynasty, she should have a child, and a legitimate child would be, of course, much better. But she claimed that she was sacrificing her own personal desires for England. So we don't know that, but that's what she said. And so this is the end of the lesson, when we are not going to talk about the Stuart dynasty. The only thing I guess is important that you know is that King James, who was already King of Scotland, became James the First of England, and this is the King James who ordered a new version of the Bible that became the most popular of all the translations of the Bible. And with this, our lesson ends and our semester ends. Now, when we go back home, we are leaving England now, and we are going back to East Tennessee. I hope that you feel that you have learned something important and that maybe you will remember some of our discussions and some of the things that we talked about. So, until tomorrow, goodbye.